Eminence, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I warmly welcome you to the second panel of our conference. This morning, panelists offered a strategic and political view on all your churches and confessions. As we said, Christians have been living in the Nineveh Plain for 2 millennia. Nowadays, they are currently on the verge of extinction. Tens of thousands of Christians have been displaced in recent years. All your communities suffered and are suffering persecutions. Daesh's objective of creating an Islamic caliphate left Christians with few options: convert, leave, or die. ISIS jihadists try to erase any evidence of Christianity. The Nineveh Plain in northern Iraq is a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religion region. It is the historic homeland of the Assyrian people. So it is vital to keep Christians in Iraq. Welcoming persecuted Christians in our own countries is relevant, but it is not the principal goal. Christians are and have always been the founders of educational and healthcare institutions in the region. They are a part of the culture, of the civilization of the region. Christians have been and must be encouraged to stay or to return to their villages. But for that, they need security, sustainable economic projects, and confidence. Security. It is first security against terrorist attacks and persecutions. Maybe it needs military protection. By who? That is a question, an important question. Security needs also justice for sanctions and prevention. Those who intentionally, for ethnic or religion reasons, support or commit atrocities should be brought to justice and prosecuted for violations of international law. How? By who? That is another question. To sustainable economic projects, Christians need help for reconstructions of their houses, of their job, of their churches. There is a crucial problem. What will be the reaction of native non-Christian populations who is living in the area if only Christians benefited of international aid? How manage good relationships between communities in that case? That is also a question we have to debate. We cannot ignore that question, and I should be interested having your opinion on that. Third, confidence. Christians who would come back home will find numerous. Some of them denounced or betrayed them. How to create confidence again and links? How tolerance could rebirth? Tolerance is a condition of stability in the region, not only in Iraq, but in the whole region, And it is a condition of our own security, even in Europe. There is a need to raise the issue of religious persecution as one of European main causes. We need political strategies to find and solve the roots of religious radicalization. We need to be more attentive to the divisions between Christianity and Islam. This is a humanitarian challenge with deep cultural impact. Hence, the question about defending our values and cultural identity is essential. Beyond Christians, we talk about tolerance, equity, security of Middle East, of Europe, of the whole world. There is a joint responsibility of politics and religious people managing this crisis. If we did not do so, we would be betraying our European values and our European political responsibility. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My intervention and the people I represent is to convey to you the suffering of the Christians of the Nineveh Plain, and to convey this to the members of the European Parliament because they represent the governments of their countries. What are the suitable solutions and the necessary solutions in order to help these people who are suffering a lot right now? Since June 2014, Mosul, which is the old Nineveh, the cradle of civilization, and the plain of Nineveh are suffering from destruction, assassination, and murder. We are not politicians, but we are convinced that the destiny of this area, and specifically the destiny of the Christians in this area, is related to the wisdom of your leaders and the policies that your countries implement, your force leaders. We have heard, and we have heard a lot of promises, but so far we have not found any concrete action that will give us hope. We know that your governments, of course, they have their own views, and of course they look after their interests. But this does not forbid that you have to think that in Iraq is a component, an essential component, which has the right to live in dignity on its land. And we are not, of course, overcomers, but we are the owners of the land. We have a civilization and a culture old enough. We have not taken this land from any person. It is what we inherited from our fathers, and the language which we use, and we have our history, which was made by our ancestors, and the civilization was built by the previous generations. The number of Christians, and specifically after in Islam, at the end of the 6th century, and for many reasons, like jizya, and asking the tax to be paid for non-Muslims, and also making restrictions for a number of people. This, of course, what Daesh or Islamic State was trying to do. And this, of course, led to the fact that the Christians in Mosul and in the Nineveh Plain and the villages of the north, and Europa, and Ahmadiyya, and this led, of course, to many problems. In the war against Saddam in 2003, and because of the sectarian militias and the terrorist groups that have spread, and that of course found a vacuum after the fall of Islam. The situation became very critical, and the situation of the Christians became intolerable because some of them have been suffering a lots of crimes and abduction and murder, and even religious men have been victims of this, and of course because the Iraqi Christians had a very good financial position and there was no protection, and of course these militias of course wreaked havoc in that part of Iraq. What led to more problems for the Christians, and that they have become convinced that people would like to kick Christians out of Iraq. What happened in one of the churches in Baghdad on the 31st of October 2010. If you remember, this was followed by the Islamic State, of course, taking control and, of course, confiscating all our properties. We would like to thank the armed forces and the Peshmerga with the militias for liberating our area, but the security situation is still not stable, and the future is not quite clear even after the liberation of our cities and villages. Of course, there is no longer Islamic State in our province, but still the sectarian thinking is still in the Sunnis and Shias who live in the area. We have lost the confidence in our neighbors, and we do not think that we are in peace and security. So we need to restore this confidence and trust. This will only happen if we have self-rule and protection from our people. Enough of us wars that have been waged in the past. We do not want our province to be an area of wars because of political conflicts and because of expansionist ideas by some. If you want us to remain here, so we have, of course, to remove Islamic State because now it is being kicked out of Mosul, but you have also to protect us from the extremist thinking because of the sum of curricula and also the decisions taken against our will, which do not take into account our situation and the people who do not accept the others. And you have to help us rebuild our areas and so that we can live peacefully in a protected area, self-managed by its people, and this of course will restore our rights. Can't we draw a new geographic plan or area for this area, and you have to distribute it or to administrative units that have self-rule within a greater administration, which could be a governorate or a region, Nineveh. Why don't we have international protection that will make all the components of this area live together? We don't want to isolate our villages and cities in an independent area from our country, Iraq. We do not want to separate from the other components of the area. We are one people. We are one component of Iraq in spite of the different names. What we really want is that we have to enjoy our rights as full citizens and will live in dignity. Any delay will have a negative impact on our children and our women. And we have psychological problems through most of us, and we have been suffering from this. We have lost confidence in our neighbors who, when we were, of course, living as friends and we had very good relations, things have changed upside down and themselves became our enemies, and they looted our whole houses and properties, and they did a lot of bad things for us. If your intention is to rid this area from the Christians, please save us and do not leave us alone. If you do not protect us, this means that you are condemning us to death, and this, of course, will lead to our extinction. So please save us from losing this and from losing our identity. And you can exercise, of course, some pressure on those who accept refugees to give them the right to go back to their area, and so that they can live in peace and they can go back and live in the area, so that we can live together and we can save what we can save, or like our traditions, our values, and our civilization and culture. Don't be afraid of us. We are not the Islamic State. In the history of our country, we have been known for being very honest people and very loyal people. We do not call for war, and this is not what we are calling for, and it is not one of our characteristics. Our education, of course, is based on human values, represented by those who accepted even death on the, so that, like Jesus, who kept that, of course, because he wanted to spread this message. This is your message, and we are asking you to carry out this message, you and those who are supporting you, in order to kick the Islamic State out of Iraq and Syria. We can no longer, of course, accept that our children are being persecuted. We are not criminals. We are not the cause of the problems. But we are victims of the conflicts of the different political parties which are corrupt. We are an innocent people. We should not be harmed in any way, and we do not accept being treated unfairly, whatever the reasons, unless the reason that we believe in our dignity and we want to live in dignity. Therefore, whatever we give to our children, we will not be giving them full duties, because some of them have immigrated and they left their property so that they can keep their traditional values and Christian values. They could have, of course, done something like Islamic State. The church has been brought into a role which is not its role, and had it not been for the efforts of those who are keen on helping the church itself would not have been able to give any financial support. This is, of course, the responsibility of the state, which gave the minimum, and which I do not mention. I hope that this statement will fall on your ears, so that you can get to those responsible, so that they should know what is happening on the ground. Enough of promises. We need action on the land. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Honourable members, Your Excellencies, thank you for this opportunity to allow me to speak to you. I'm representing the European the European External Action Service, the Foreign Diplomatic Service of the EU today. So we are the service that works on our relations with Iraq, the Iraqi government, including the regional government of Kurdistan. I'm here today to explain a little bit of what the EU has been doing in Iraq so far, in particular focusing on the minorities in Iraq and the Christian minorities, and where we intend to go in the next few months in particular, but also over time, over the next few years. I was very encouraged by the words, on the one hand, saddened, but at the same time encouraged by the words of His Eminence, the Archbishop, when he said that, that Christians in Iraq still consider themselves as Iraqis and are looking to live together with other communities, even if the trust that was there has been seriously broken and put to the test. I think that is a reflection of the strength that the Christian faith brings to you. What I would like to say is that, and I'm a personal witness to this because I follow all the meetings of the EU member states in the Council and other places closely, is that the EU and by that I mean EU, the institutions, and also the EU member states individually are very aware of what has been happening in Iraq in terms of the atrocities that have been committed against not just the Christians, but also your Yazidi brethren and your Shabak neighbors and many other minority groups. I myself have been following Iraq since 2014, so I'm fully aware of all that has happened as well. And all not only have only condemned these actions by Daesh, but have expressly underlined the importance that the EU gives to preserving the multi-ethnic, multi-sectarian, and multi-confessional nature of Iraq, which is the hallmark of this country, and indeed also of its neighbors, Syria and Lebanon. So this is most recently the foreign ministers of the EU on the 19th of June issued once again council conclusions on Iraq, one of many over the past 3 years, where this point in particular is reiterated in light of the fact that we are reaching hopefully the end of the fight against Daesh, at least in the main areas of conflict, and that we are now looking to the post-Daesh phase, the phase where we have to stabilize the liberated areas, start reconstruction, but also start this very important process of trust building, peace building, and reconciliation, which will be a difficult one. And I say that as somebody who comes from a country who's had that experience in the recent past, over the last 20 years. What I can say also is that we have many, many conflicts in the region, not just Iraq, but Yemen and other, Syria, Libya and other areas. So the EU's resources have been quite stretched over the last 5 years. So, but nonetheless, we've also placed a heavy emphasis on Iraq. But in our policies, we need to apply what we call the all of Iraq policy, which means to address the needs of the Iraqi citizens, regardless of their ethnic origin. This has meant that in the first instance, when we've provided humanitarian aid and stabilization aid, a lot of the support has gone to in particular, people who are fleeing from Sunni areas and are facing, starvation right now after leaving Mosul. Very, very difficult conditions there. At the same time, because we know that, the preservation of Iraq's ethnic diversity, the preservation of Christians in the heartlands, which is very close to our heart, won't happen by its own. We have actively been trying to pursue policies that, on the one hand, are not discriminatory against other groups, but at the same time do target the needs of the Christian minorities. You may not have seen so much of it so far. That is because a lot of this support has been triggered more recently. The main mechanism of support that we have had so far for what you would call the stabilization of liberated areas, which is the first step towards reconstruction, has been through the UNDP and its stabilization funds. And as what I know from the UNDP is that there are now, in part also thanks to our funding, some 80 to 90 projects that are running or will be running up and running in the Nineveh Plains as we speak and in the coming weeks, relating to the restoration of basic services and other important needs. That doesn't deal with the reconstruction issue, yes, I must admit, but we take every step at a time because there are so many challenges that we're facing at the moment. But we are aware also of the reconstruction challenge, but that's something that will follow. I think more importantly, even than just the question of how much money we put in and how many resources, is the question of the political governance of these territories and the major uncertainty that hangs over these areas, the Nineveh Plains, but also if you look at Sinjar and other areas. One word of caution there, I would say, is, it would be dangerous in the view of the EU to try and look at, whilst not returning to the status quo of before, we need some sort of new enhanced self-governing governance mechanisms, but we would caution against trying to invent new models that give some sort of quasi-autonomous status or other forms of governance which are untested and actually may lead to new problems, and actually in the current context may in fact be unproductive and even counterproductive. What we have been saying from the beginning, given that the Nineveh Plains are currently under control of both the Kurdistan regional government and the federal Iraqi government, the split between the two, is that a dialogue needs to take place between the federal government of Iraq and the Kurdistan region on these issues. And that includes, of course, also the application, as is foreseen under the Constitution of Iraq, of Article 140. There are many, many issues that need to be resolved in terms of applying Article 140, but this is the constitutionally correct way of proceeding, and it's one of the only method that will allow some sort of settled, coherent settlement that is the basis of a dialogue between different groups. What we would also say is, regardless of what the solution might be, there is no question that these lands essentially belong to the ethnic minorities in those areas where the ethnic minorities have traditionally been located. That they belong to these minorities, and it's the minorities that have to return there, whatever the future control would be. And this is a pledge that both the federal government and the Kurdistan regional government would have to make. The historic inheritance of that land remains with the people who that land belongs to. That will be a point that the EU will always strongly emphasize. And this is not just as a matter of altruism, but also for the sake of stability. There is no point having disputes over land that used to belong to people who have left the country, who are in other places, who have fled, who don't dare to come back, because this only leads to a new cycle of problems. It's a major factor also for stability. So it's about preserving the diverse character of Iraq, but also of ensuring that in doing so, we are providing the best means of stability and stabilization for Iraq. A few other points, and I don't want to take the floor too long because I'm sure you also wish to speak, but on the issue of accountability, we've been discussing with the federal government of Iraq, not just us, but also individual member states, possible mechanisms for accountability. In first instance, of course, of Daesh, because this is where the source of crimes has been. But in a longer instance, it's important also that the federal government and the Kurdistan regional government show there's accountability for any transgressions that have been committed by, against the policy of their own governments, but transgressions by individual members of armed forces where such transgressions have occurred. And we're encouraged that Mr. Abadi himself has said that he would investigate and follow up those transgressions, which we think is essential. The EU is working towards a new EU strategy on Iraq, which will hopefully be ready by the end of this year. I can't say too much about resources, but the ambition is to increase the amount of resources that will be available for Iraq, even compared to what we've had so far. This is because we recognize, as Mrs. Mogherini herself has said, our High Representative, this is the defeat of Daesh is not really the beginning of the end. It is the main challenge on the one hand, but it's only basically the end of the beginning, because the challenges that Your Eminence has mentioned in terms of tackling violent extremism, social and economic imbalances, and also the many political challenges, including reconciliation and other reforms that the government itself has committed to, those lie ahead. And in a sense, even after all the sacrifices that have been made by the Iraqi people in terms of humans' life in the battle against Daesh, the fight that lies ahead of us is in many ways the most difficult one. So I would encourage you to be persistent, but also count on the fact that the EU will remain committed to Iraq, and that also means to the minorities in Iraq, and that includes, of course, the Christian communities. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to recall two resolutions of this European Parliament, one being the resolution recognizing the atrocities committed against Christians, Yazidis, and other nationalities in Iraq as a genocide. I remember coming to Iraq, meeting church leaders, meeting party leaders, and NGOs visiting camps. I remember IDPs saying that, well, genocide, isn't that a very fancy word for what our people has gone through? And sure, it could be, but it's also the most powerful word in international law. It's a word that, if ever said by the United Nations Security Council, would mean a procedure for the prosecution of perpetrators of Daesh, ISIS. It would be a very strong signal to any wannabe jihadist that you will be, just as Mr. Omsic said yesterday, behind bars for the rest of your life if you take part of this. But it is also a way to restore dignity, to restore the people as such. Because if you recognize a genocide, you're obliged to help. And it is also when atrocities like these get recognized as such, when that word is used, that the international community feels this moral obligation. We have seen this in the case of Kosovo. We have seen this in the case of the post-Yugoslavia war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this is one of the reasons why this was important, this decision in the European Parliament. It's why it's important to further work for a United Nations Security Council recognition. The other resolution that I want to talk about addressed northern Iraq and Mosul. And to summarize the intent of this resolution is to say that it's a support for a concretization of the very federalism that is provided by the Constitution of the Republic of Iraq. We know that a cabinet decision of the Iraqi Council of Ministers was made on January 21st, 2014 to create a governorate on the Nineveh Plain. We support the implementation of this. We also know that this very constitution, it provides for further self-governance through Article 119, just as the parties have stressed here in Brussels during this conference. And repopulation and reconstruction goes hand in hand. I want to stress the fact that many people will go back when they see a long-term commitment for the reconstruction and rehabilitation of the Nineveh Plain. And this could be a very important part of that, because if they see answers for very valid questions on security, how is the long-term security going to be guaranteed on the Nineveh Plain? If they see legitimate answers to that question, they will be much more ready to go back. So the whole idea, the whole concept of implementing Iraqi federalism is a very important part of this discussion as well. When international companies sees that there is indeed a long-term commitment to rehabilitate the Nineveh Plain, investments could start. We, as the office of Mr. Adakson, who I work for, we would also like to see the EU support all kinds of aid organizations close to the people. There are NGOs here who are ready to get to work. The churches have gone together to try to rehabilitate the Nineveh Plain. And this has to be strengthened. They need to get the funding the funding they need to actually rehabilitate this area. Now, the process leading up to this conference has been quite a drama sometimes. You all know that. But I'm very happy about the fruitful discussions that we have. And I think that one of the reasons we're having this was an experience that me and Lars had. And this was organizations from Iraq coming one-on-one to us to explain their situation. And I will now refer to a top diplomat who said that, who had the same experience, who said that 70% of what they say is the same, but 30% is differing. And the 30% that differs, it overshadows the 70% on which they agree. And we thought, well, why not bring all of them, try to get all of them to Brussels at the same time to express the will of the people. Why is this important? Because we need to understand what you want, what you need, and it's only together that the voice is legitimate. And when that voice is united, then we can act on your behalf vis-a-vis people like Mr. Harrison in the European External Service, vis-a-vis the White House, the State Department, the United Nations, our own governments, and so on. You could help us help you reconstruct, rehabilitate the Nineveh Plain. I want to stress this because it's really important. And I want to conclude with a quote from Matthew 12:25. Having received communion in the Cathedral of Baghdad from His Eminence here, I can't refrain from quoting the Holy Scripture, so I will do that. Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself will not stand, end quote. This goes for every nation. It goes for Iraq, and it goes for your people.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The speaker is one of the representatives of the Chaldean Syriac Assyrian people in the Iraqi parliament. On behalf of this people, I'd like to thank all those who attended this meeting, and profuse thanks are presented to the European Union because it felt our sufferings. It felt what we have been subjected in terms of collective killings for decades or centuries, but lately it was seen acutely and has surfaced. Here I would like to convey a message as one of the Iraqi parliamentarians that we are not party to the division of Iraq, and we do not want to be a party in the division of Iraq, because Iraq today, the Mesopotamia, here are our roots, and here is our civilization, and here is our decision. However, let us be frank. To solve problems, we have to be realistic and frank, and not too kindly in our words. Today, the non-Muslim components in the country are subjected to great tragedies. Legally speaking, by the formulation of laws within the Iraqi parliament, such as the national Article 126 that forces children, the minors, to become Muslims in the event one of the two parents of that child does become Muslim. And from a national point of view, we are very, very proud of all the constituents and components of the Iraqi people. But everybody knows that the Chaldean Syriac Assyrians are the authentic, original peoples of this country. However, Arab nationalism and Kurdish and Turkmen nationalisms were imposed. Those who came to our countries not 1,000 years ago, but just maybe 1,000 years ago, and the Chaldean Syriac Assyrian nationality or identity was not included in the ID card. Every day we ask the government to solve our problems. Every day we knock the door of the government so that they can solve, lift these sufferings, but we don't see any solutions. Christian households have been subjected to robbery, theft, and rape from the northeast part of Iraq to the southern part of Iraq. Our houses were robbed. Our regions have been changed geographically, demographically, intentionally. Our historical cities have seen their names changed. What is the concept of nationalism, and how can we live with our brothers and sisters in our own country when we are being subjected in the midst of day to all these tragedies and all these horrendous acts? We are not and have never been part of the struggle, but we have been victims of the struggle. We never thought for one day to harm any of our brothers and sisters belonging to the other communities, but very unfortunately there are armed forces that are not under control, that aggress us in the midst of the day and robs us from our property, our land, our houses, and therefore we have come here to be frank with you. And we demand from the international community and from the Iraqi government itself and the government of the Kurdistan region to feel our pain and to help us to remain in the land of our forefathers. Otherwise, we will not be able to remain. That is the reason we came here, and thank you.
Just I want to bring, indeed I was trying to bring it from the early beginning in the morning, a very important question because it had its impact on all the orientation of the discussions or recommendations here. Before being priest, I'm academically I graduate electrical engineer. So I'm in love with the figures, with the realities, with facts. Yeah. So one of the realities, unpleasant realities now, in the Mesopotamia, currently Iraq, which is our motherland, speaking of as an ethnic group or culture and as a church, unfortunately, the present fact is now that we are all over Iraq, around 250,000 left. These are the most optimistic figures. This as figure, keep in mind. 80% of it is in Nineveh Plain and Kurdistan. The second fact is that out of the 18 provinces of current Iraq, we do exist only in 7. So from early beginning, we doesn't exist in 11th of these provinces. However, out of these 7, we do exist in terms of demography, which means people and land, where we can practice ourselves, practice our identity, practice our rights. We do exist only in 3. They are Nineveh Plain, not all Nineveh. Nineveh Plain, Dohuk, and some parts of Erbil, Kurdistan, and Kawa and Shaklawa. South of Nineveh Plain, down to Kuwait borders, we don't have a single square meter. We don't have a single village. We have 40,000 Christians currently, around 40,000 or less in Baghdad, in 6 million populated city. So we can never consider this a demography where we can practice our. Yeah. So my question, which I was trying to bring it in from an early beginning, because it's very important, for decades, at least 2 decades, unfortunately, our politicians had hesitated, escaped from answering this question. Personally, I had brought it in the public media many times. Now, as we are approaching the reality of the post-IS phase, we need to deal with it concretely, clearly. My question is, for a minority of this tiny demography, which is existing in Nineveh Plain and in Kurdistan, what is the interest, and for whom is the interest that these 2 demographies to be divided into under 2 different constitutional, administrative, legislative umbrellas?
Thank you. When you spoke, and when your colleague, Mr. Harrison, spoke, you said that it is very important for security to prevail and for there to be reconstruction in order for us to be able to reach a better future. And Mr. Harrison said that the European Parliament has taken a number of steps, but those steps were not announced. I believe that it is very important for those steps to be taken and to be concluded, because when you have a large number of people who become extinct, when you have a large number of the population that is wiped away, then it will be very difficult to reconstitute that population. The more we wait, the more difficult it will be for us. And it is what we want, and it is very important for us, is for this situation not to prevail, not to continue. And we, as Chaldeans and as other denominations present here today, we have a proposal that we are going to submit within this unified letter or paper that we are going to issue. We are going to mention the fact that we will need to have a security system, a security structure that is reinforced in the Nineveh Plain.
Quite a few of the comments were addressed also to the EU. So, very briefly, I think we recognise the precarious situation, and we do know that this is a critical period in terms of our response to the situation. If there's no hope, there's no return, and hence we are actually on a losing path. What I can say is, as I mentioned earlier, is that we're looking to increase the resources that we have for Iraq. That will be a basis for us to then expand our support, not just to the immediate needs, but also to more longer-term support. And I would wish that a good deal of that support also goes to the needs that you and other communities have in the reconstruction or in the Nineveh Plains in general. In terms of the overall situation, which the gentleman, the honourable member of the Council of Representatives was referring to, we are aware of that particular issue which you mentioned with the ID card in Iraq. In fact, the delegation in Baghdad was engaged with the Iraqi government at the time, 2015, when the proposal first came out, and understand that as a result of negotiations or discussions between the groups of the minority, so the representatives of minority groups and the federal government, and also sort of the involvement of the EU and other representatives, that at least in the initial stages that law has not been taken forward, and we would hope that in future also any provisions in the law then reflect the conventions that Iraq has committed to respecting under the UN. We are, by the way, engaged in a dialogue with the Iraqi government, as the ambassador of Iraq here can confirm, under the EU-Iraq Partnership and Cooperation Agreement. And one of the discussions we have there is the discussion on what we call democracy and human rights. And indeed, Mr. Ambassador, the issue of minorities is one of the regular issues that we discuss. And indeed, also the issue of the ID cards. But yes, a lot of work needs to be done, and we don't have a magic wand, but we are perhaps in a position to be able to help, not in each and every issue, but in the best way we can. And as I said, that commitment is there, and we will be here in Iraq providing support, I'm fairly certain. If you want a timeline, at least until 2020. I say this in a global way because we haven't finalized the support measures. I can't say specifically how much will go to this or that area of support, but be assured that the EU will continue to support Iraq well into the coming years, and this also to address the issues that you mentioned. Thank you.
Just before finishing the panel, I want to thank Lars Andersson, who is our host and who has the initiative of that conference. And I think it's a very, very important. I don't know if it is very important for you, but I think it's very important for us to hear you. Thank you.